After you've done a survey, you need to decide who to talk to. And let's talk about sampling. So let's draw some people here that we might want to sample. I'll just draw stick figures. Here's his head, here's his body or her body. And there's first person, here's the second person, and a third person. And let's put some other people, and let's say the people of this color, have the same thoughts, which obviously is not true, but and then we have, but a lot of times, we'll have these other people right here, and we'll draw two of them, and we'll have some blue people. And let's have this last blue person waving hi. And so if everybody was the same, and let's say this is our population, population's everybody, normally we want to take a sample, because if you have 300 million people, just think of the postage to get that survey out there if you mail it, or the email, trying to get all their email addresses, assuming everybody has access to an email account. But let's say we have this, what do we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. If everybody's the same, they have the same thoughts, we could just interview this person right here, or actually any of them. And you could interview one person and it would be representative of the population because there's no variation. However, normally we do have variation. So the more people we could sample, the better our results. And so what we want to do though is make it so it's equally likely that we choose any of these people, that we're not just saying, oh, we just want to choose these people over here. Here's our 3 people that we're sampling. Well, these 3 have very different viewpoints than these 3, so we want to randomly sample these people. And the more, and assuming it's a lot of people we're looking at, I don't want to draw, thousands and thousands of people up here. That might take a little while. But the more people we can sample, the better our results, especially if we can make it so each person has an equal likelihood of being chosen. Now there's some cases that might lead to something called selection bias. Now selection bias is that there's a likelihood that we may not choose somebody. We have a bias involved of not making it equally likely to choose each of these people. So first thing that might lead to selection bias is likelihood of selection. So let's write that down here. Where's my pen? There it is. So we're talking about selection bias. If I can write here. Come on, pen. Selection bias. So number 1 for selection, number 1 is likelihood. Oops. And actually I need to put an E on there, don't I? Likelihood of selection. The likelihood of selection. That for classic case of this would be Harry Truman. One of the newspapers came out and said Truman loses the presidency. Well, the reason they said that was because they did a phone interview, and at that time in the 1940s, richer people tended to have telephones, and people who didn't have as much money didn't have a telephones. And the people who were more likely to vote for Dewey, who was the one who did not win the election, had the telephones. So the people who voted for Truman, who tend to have not as much income and not as many phones, they did not have a good likelihood of being selected. They didn't have a phone. So the results were biased. So let's say these people are the people without the phones. So we only interview the people over here. Well, that means these people may have been much more likely to vote for Truman. We don't get them, and so our results are bad. So let's talk about the second one. Second reason is the likelihood of responding. So let's see if I can. Okay, so likely. So actually, so let's see if I can do it here. Well, let's cross that out. So likelihood of responding. You know, some people just might make a choice of they're not going to answer your questions. So if some people are less likely to respond, there's some cases where people have argued that poor people may be less likely to respond to mail or telephone surveys, or some people who are less likely to be home might be less likely to respond. So if in this case, you might get these people this time, just in fact, you might have a nice selection bias, but let's say these two people are much less likely to respond. So they don't respond, the other people do respond. Your results might be bad because of the likelihood of response. That might lead to a selection bias. Number 3. Number 3 is not honest in response. Not honest. You ask them a question, then they just don't tell you what they really think. So let's say these two people over here. You ask them a question, they say, oh yeah, we absolutely agree with that. We're going to vote for a certain, let's say you're doing a political survey, and they said, yeah, we're going to vote for that person. And then they go out and vote exactly the opposite way. Well, that's going to give you a wrong result. Also a case of likelihood of selection. Interesting case in terms of healthcare. If they're doing a transplant surgery, normally the doctors would like somebody who's, needs a transplant but is not too sick so that the surgery doesn't kill them. Well, that might lead to an idea that, the people who are selected for, you've got a selection bias in the sense that healthier people are more likely to get the transplant. So if you just look at the raw data, you might say, oh, look, this transplant tends to have good results. Well, is it good results because of the transplant, or is it good results because you chose healthier people? So you need to be careful about how selection process works. So hopefully that helps. And actually the last thing we want to talk about is the margin of error. Oops. So margin of error, or there's going to be mistakes. You're taking a random survey. You're just randomly, your group may not be totally representative, but you want to keep it random because you don't want to just say, oh, I'm going to just choose these people. That's very likely to make it a bad sample. So margin of error lets you know what the upper and lower bounds of the results are. So let's say you find out, or you get a result that 52% voted for somebody. So here's our 52%. And let's say you have a margin of error of 4%, which really means that 4%, that means what? 52 minus 4 is what? 48. So 48%, 2, and 4% more than 52% would be 56%. So you would tend to say that your results are between 48% and 56%. Now it doesn't mean that it's equally likely anywhere in here, because your 52%, let's say this is our sample where it's very unlikely we're going to get people down here, not likely to get people up here, so this might be fairly close to our 52. At least our 52 is somewhere in here. And so we have a lower bound here and an upper bound here, but somewhere in the middle is more likely where you're going to get your results, even though there's going to be some error. The actual value might be 53% or 51%, but it's not equally likely that you're going to be down there at 48% or 56%. Thank you.